Hello, we have Bob with us again today, and the topic today is cross-border relationship building. Bob, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
So the topic, we have three questions that we'll be covering today. The first one is, what is relationship building? Why is it important? And how do we go about it? How do we actually build the relationships? So Bob, would you like to talk a little bit about what is relationship building across borders, and why is it important?
Yeah, I mean, at the heart of that question is a very fundamental human activity, the need to establish some kind of connection with another human being. And of course, we do that in personal life and we do it in professional life. I think one of the things that strikes me and that is very important to bear in mind when working cross-border and when working virtually is that the meaning of a relationship may differ quite significantly between international partners. So at a very basic level, some people define relationship almost by not having a relationship, by maintaining distance, by maintaining high levels of formality, even in interpersonal conversation, by maintaining high levels of silence. And that all of that distance and silence and maybe focus on the job first indicates high levels of respect. That's a kind of politeness. And interestingly, in other parts of the world, that it's exactly the opposite, that relationships are about getting close to people, being very obviously friendly and smiley and talking a lot, making lots of noise. And those two types of people, when they meet, they struggle because they have very different expectations, very different definitions of politeness. So at a very basic, when you go international, you can't assume that your definition of relationship holds. I don't know whether you've had that experience yourself.
I have had experience. Well, I guess thinking back, for instance, I lived in Japan, and I know it wasn't kind of a virtual. I wasn't building virtual relationships with people I was working with, but what I noticed is that the focus is work, but at the same time there is a concern by senior management about, for instance, what kind of lifestyle we're living, whether we have a family, we have children. So there is in Japanese culture, I think the management I guess makes it their business to know a bit more about the lives of the employees, so that they could potentially cater more for them. And but I know there are cultures, like even in Australia. I mean, people might ask, how's family and everything, but it's not. They don't directly make it their business to ask questions, personal questions at least. And I know probably in Europe, in Northern Europe, it's again very different. So, I mean, I've had limited exposure, but I think that's the main. What I just mentioned is the type of relationships I've kind of come across.
Yeah, embedded in what you were saying there is, of course, another big issue is who you have a relationship with. But in different places, the availability, the accessibility of different levels of corporate hierarchy to an interpersonal relationship differs enormously. And of course, in the high power distance cultures, it may be impossible for team members to form any kind of meaningful relationship with the senior manager. There's too great a distance expected there. Of course, I work a lot in the Nordics, which is where I am now, and I think the attitude to leadership is characterized as healthy disrespect here in Iceland. So, in other words, it's very, very flat, and if you hold yourself apart because of status from relationships with other people in the organization, that really goes against the grain of the culture. So you have multiple complexities, who you form a relationship with and how that relationship is actually lived. And lots of complexities, not just due to culture, sometimes just down to personality, of course.
Absolutely. And just to also probably shed some light on context as well, because relationships, for instance, in Japan, the way you behave and interact with your boss at work is very different to the way you interact with your boss when you go out for a drink. So it almost like the relationship just changes completely, so that you almost could be as friendly as you like with your boss when you're out drinking, but when you're at work, you have to be very formal and polite and so on. So I guess I haven't really seen that anywhere else, but I wonder if you have any experience or could maybe shed some light on why that could be the case, or whether any other culture might have very similar kind of behavior.
Yeah, not so much down to power distance, but I do see in very task-oriented environments such as Germany, Sweden, even in Iceland to a degree, that Denmark as well, that when you do business, when you're in a meeting room, you focus on business when you're in the office. But that's not to say that relationship of formality always holds, because 5 minutes later, when you hop in the taxi and you're on the way to the restaurant, the person who was before staring at you in a rather hostile gaze suddenly breaks into a smile and everything becomes very formal and relaxed. So that's a very kind of curious thing about task-oriented environments. It's more about segmentation of the relationship into different types of relationship. It's not always serious. It's about when to be serious and when to relax.
So that is it is a common practice in task-oriented environments and task-oriented cultures.
Exactly, and I think those who are used to a more holistic approach, the same person at home, same person in the workplace, I think they find that separation extremely alienating and extremely bizarre in a certain way, that one individual could segment their behavior so strongly. But that's an element of intercultural difference which I see on a regular basis. And it's interesting that task orientation carries with it a whole host of values about focus, about efficiency, but to the more holistic oriented individual, it crosses a borderline. It's seen as impolite, as hostile, as arrogant. So you have very positive core values really clashing in meeting rooms on a regular basis in global meetings.
Absolutely. So we look at some of the differences between cultures and how people, I guess, could face challenges when interacting, like with cultures that could be task oriented or otherwise. So what are other kinds of cultural challenges that people face when it comes to building cross-border relationships, Bob?
Well, I think pragmatically, when working internationally, particularly when working virtually, I think you kind of have to adapt your expectation that you're simply not going to be able to form the depth of relationship with a virtual partner as you are with a face-to-face partner. So you're going to have to get used to working partly with the stranger, someone who you don't know. And companies these days, at least global corporates, are not giving the travel budgets for people to travel and work face-to-face. So you are working with a slightly corrupted deck of cards, if I can say that. You don't really know the person's level of competence. You don't really know their level of commitment. You don't really know if what they're saying is what they really mean. And I think because you're working with that rather superficial level of relationship, you probably have to work a little bit harder to summarize, to repeat, to dig a little bit deeper with questions, just to make sure that the kind of decisions that you seem to be agreeing are real decisions. The risk with that is that as you double check, you seem to be questioning the integrity of the person in front of you. So you're always walking a very fine line of accepting superficiality and having to double check in order to make sure that you're not assuming too much. And it's a constant challenge that you're going to constantly make mistakes, and so you're just going to have to constantly apologize as you make mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think no matter how well the intentions and no matter how much you kind of care for the relationship and care for the outcomes and the project, you will still make mistakes because of those. One aspect obviously is the cultural aspect, and the other is, well, you're uncertain, so you'd like to dig deeper. So you might, when it might be interpreted as a kind of a lack of trust. For instance, if you're kind of trying to dig deeper and into whether, investigating the level of commitment of the individual. So if the other person feels like, oh, maybe this person really doesn't trust me, then obviously that taints the relationship as well.
Yeah, so the flip side of that, in order to avoid the other person having to ask lots of questions, I think people working in virtual teams, they need perhaps other mechanisms to make it clear that the people in the team are good at what they're doing. So maybe you see some virtual teams circulating CVs, which at a certain level might seem very formal and unnecessary, but at least it puts on the table that you're dealing with a really highly competent set of people. And then in the verbal interactions, you might also need to surface certain sets of values which are driving your motivation, so that the other person can hear, okay, this person is really motivated by a commitment to quality. He's not attacking me because he doubts my competence. He wants to drive quality to the customer. Okay, I can understand that. And then the third idea, it comes back to the competence, integrity, care question. You've got to also take time, not just for transactional communication, but for offline small talk. I even know people who sit and they have virtual cups of coffee with their virtual teams, just to stimulate the relationship building of 30 minutes of talking about absolutely nothing, but in order just to build a sense of companionship with your colleagues. And I think it's hard to do, might seem very artificial, but maybe interesting to consider. Offline discussions just to build relationships.
Sure, and we kind of talked about this as how much small talk is seen differently in different cultures. Would it be that in some cultures or some contexts or task-oriented cultures that small talk is seen as a waste of time, and some employees wouldn't want to engage in that sort of activity, or having a virtual coffee, for instance?
No, that's absolutely the case, that in some contexts small talk is seen as a waste of time. So I think it's important always to explain the purpose of small talk, and maybe make small talk a fraction more meaningful. I mean, remember, whenever we talk about relationships internationally, it's never just interpersonal, it's always what I would call intersystemic. In other words, for me to work with you virtually, I need to know not only you well, I need to know your boss, and I need to know the boss of the boss, because all of that impacts on how you're able to communicate with me. There's a chain of command behind you, and a set of values and a set of priorities. So when we sit and have small talk, actually, we don't sit and talk about the weather and talk about football. Maybe we talk about your company, we talk about your organization, we talk about how business is going, we talk about what you're doing for your local customer. And all of that enables me to build a picture of your organization that enables me to understand you. So I think in a sense, we need to abandon the notion of small talk and use a different term, maybe like corporate intelligence, which enables us to understand the individuals we're working with as part of a complex system.
Absolutely, and I think that's a very important key element, that you understand the system by which the individual is working, so that you can better understand how to interact with that individual and how they're affected in their environment, and how whether it's their performance, behavior, and so on.
I mean, it's a very basic level. I mean, people in Germany often have a hard time in international projects because you get requests for data coming from the UK or from the US into Germany. Please send us data about your employees, and they don't release that data. And everybody, of course, labels the Germans then as uncollaborative, until they realize that that Germany has very strict data privacy laws, which means that they're not able to release personal data into general space. And unless you know that, it's very easy to make a wrong call about somebody, why somebody is or isn't collaborating. So I think, yeah, system or corporate intelligence is certainly something that should be high on somebody's radar, but very often we overemphasize the interpersonal rather than the intersystemic relationship.
Absolutely. And also, going back to mindset, and we touched on this in previous sessions as well, and I think the example you gave is a really good one in describing what kind of mindset one needs to have in order to be effective in building virtual, relationships. And that's the mindset of curiosity, and the way you inquire about why someone is behaving this way, in this case, for instance, or not giving them the benefit of the doubt that there might be a reason that is not necessarily that they're not interested or they're not committed, or so kind of. And we asked how you inquire with the critical why and the curious why in previous sessions. In this case, would a certain mindset help in building positive virtual relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. I think curiosity, again, just not just about the person, but I think a lot of the reasons why relationships struggle internationally or virtually is, again, not because people are bad people, it's often because of competence levels, which are very uneven across organizations, and especially in some of the developing countries where business units are less well resourced. You often have one person doing multiple jobs in a kind of a generalist function. For example, you might have a head of HR who does training, because there isn't a learning and development specialist. They don't have in-house trainers. And when the mature business units have three people, and in the immature business units they have just one, you often get an imbalance of competence, which puts strain on the less competent person to deliver, and that causes tension. And I think the other thing that we often forget is that the workflows that you have in Australia and that I have here in the UK may not match up. So when I need something from you, I might ask you at exactly the wrong time and you can't collaborate. So your reason for not fulfilling the relationship demand that I place on you is nothing personal. It's, again, just because of workflows. And I think the only way we really understand that is by asking simple questions like, are you busy at the moment? What have you got coming up over the next 2 or 3 weeks? And just building an understanding of the working lives of our partners. It all sounds very obvious, but my experience is that people are incredibly ignorant of the working pressures of their colleagues in different countries.
Absolutely, and priorities and other commitments that might be playing a role in how they're completing whatever jobs that are assigned to them. So, in regards to, kind of exploring more how to build those successful relationships that are productive and conducive to better outcomes. We talked about, kind of asking more questions, spending more time, just virtually talking about how the dynamics of the environment are in the context that those individuals are in, and what other things could we add to the mix to make things more successful?
I think if we think about relationships as fundamentally an emotional phenomenon, that when we have a good relationship with someone, there's a kind of a positive feeling we have for them, and if we have a bad relationship, there's a negative feeling. So then we have to come back to what do we need to keep in mind in order to manage emotions. And I think there are 4 fundamentals. If we don't manage those well, we will trigger a negative emotion in the other person. So firstly, I think all human beings have a need to feel a sense of affiliation, a sense of belonging. We like to feel part of the group. We like to feel similar to the other person. So I think, when building relationships, trying to look for things in common, a common interest, a common background. Building a sense of affiliation is important, because if the person feels excluded or strange from you, that will damage the relationship. So affiliation is one. Secondly, I think appreciation. Human beings tend to react well if they feel appreciated. If they've done a good job and you say thank you, you acknowledge it. And I think not enough time is dedicated to positive feedback. Very simple messages of saying thank you, complimenting people on the job well done. Then I think connected to that is a sense, if we don't feel respected, if our status is somehow compromised by the other person, then we often feel a negative emotion trigger. So I think we also need to respect somebody's background, their role, their contribution. It relates a little bit to appreciation, but it's much more a respect for competence in a way, and authority, which is very important in some cultures. And then finally, and this is one which is often overlooked, and it's slightly paradoxical when we think about affiliation, human beings also have a deep need to feel autonomous. That's why we feel when somebody steps into our space, we often feel a strong sense of outrage. And I think a lot of the challenges I see in cross-border relationships are when somebody feels that somebody has stepped into their space, when they've done their job for them without the mandate to do that. So at a certain level, when you're sending emails, when you're sitting in meetings, bear in mind appreciation, affiliation, respect and autonomy. That if you're signaling those four things clearly enough, you're likely to be in a positive relationship state with the other.
Absolutely. I think those four are fundamental to building those positive relationships. I think just looking at motivation as well, it kind of, as you were going through those four important elements, it also reminded me of a theory of self-determination theory, where it talks about autonomy, competency and relatedness being fundamental in people feeling intrinsically motivated. And so that touches on both creating an environment where individuals self-driven, they feel competent. So again, the appreciation aspect, and I guess touches on competency as well. So you believe that people are competent, they can get the job done, you appreciate them for what they're doing. The affiliation looks at the relatedness aspect, building those positive relationships and feeling cared for and caring for others. And the respect, definitely the respect. I think everyone, no matter what culture you're from, no matter what age, what gender, respect is important, and everyone wants to feel respected for. So I think having those, I guess it also helps with the mindset. And if you go in feeling that people want to be affiliated, they want to build positive relationships, they want to feel respected, they want to feel competent, and they also, what was the fourth one, Bob? I'm just trying to recall the fourth one you mentioned.
So appreciation, affiliation, autonomy, and status. And
status, absolutely, and feeling that they're in control. The autonomy is really important. If people feel that they're not being controlled by others, but they're in control, and making them feel that they're in control. So
remember, these are very simple things to signal verbally. So, for example, that's not my role, that's your role. That respects the other person's autonomy. I think the same as you. It's a simple appeal to affiliation. Thank you is a simple expression of appreciation. And I really respect the work that you did, a simple use of the word respect. So very often it's not complex linguistically, it just needs conscious application of some of these ideas.
Absolutely. But I guess the main place that you could implement these are in the communication, in the verbal or written communication that you exhibit, whether via email or when you are doing a Skype call with the individual. But it is through the communication that these concepts can be exhibited or implemented.
Exactly. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And remember that very, very simple automatic behaviors which so many people use. The yes but, for example, is a very simple destructor of of status, autonomy, appreciation, and affiliation. Those two words undermine all of those four principles in a way. So it doesn't, not easy, not so difficult to build, but very easy to destroy with unconscious mechanisms.
Absolutely, and it's this kind of language is so ingrained in a lot of us that we use it a lot, and we're not conscious of it. So the yes but negates everything that's been said before the but. So even if someone comes up with an idea and you say yes but, it's just negating all the quality or the integrity of what was said before the but. So so being aware of some of that language and using potentially integrative language like and, I think you mentioned that in some of your workshops as well, that your use of and instead of but to kind of integrate what is being said. Fantastic. Anything else? Any final words, Bob, for building more positive relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately you never quite know where you are with a relationship unless you ask for feedback. So I think that's another impulse I would give people. Take time, formally or informally, just to unlock the other person's opinion of you. And however hard you work, unless you have that feedback cycle, as we always say, you're operating in the dark. So I still think there's a fear factor not asking for feedback, but I think having the courage to open up and receive critique actually itself is a relationship building strategy. Absolutely. And not doing that maintains a certain distance. Absolutely.
And I think it goes back to the mindset. So, and the mindset of individuals being open to feedback and open to candid feedback, I think is really important for their own personal development and growth and building those positive relationships.
No, absolutely, yeah.
So that kind of concludes our session. Thank you so much, Bob, for joining us for the 5th session of our series, and looking forward to the next session, which we have to still come up with a topic.
Don't worry, we'll come up with something, yeah.
Again, thank you very much, Bob, and have a great day.
Okay. Thank you then. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.